الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. When the Arabs and the Muslims are being reviled throughout the West as terrorists, as fanatics, as fascists, and being intolerant, it becomes necessary, lest we forget, to recall the past Western Christian terrorism of the Crusades against the Arabs. This well-documented record of the cannibalistic and barbaric crusaders, which is well known in the Arab world, is rather obscure to most Westerners, because it is conveniently concealed and deeply buried in unnoticed specialized books. Of all the religious wars in human history, waged by any religion, at any place, at any time, none have been bloodier, more genocidal, more barbaric, and more protracted than the 200-year holy wars by the Western Crusades against the Arabs and Islam. The Western Crusaders soaked Asia Minor and the Eastern Arab Mediterranean coast with Arab blood, both Muslim and Jewish. The objective of the Crusades was simple: to destroy the Arabs, whether Muslim or Jew, in the Holy Land of Palestine and its surrounds. And it is well documented by James David Barber in the Book of Democracy, and I quote, "On the ground that they had no right to inhabit their part of the earth, while for a Christian, the whole world is his country," unquote. The Muslims, Arab and non-Arab, who have always tolerated the Christians and Jews, married into them and lived and worked with them side by side in peace as people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, in all Arab and Muslim lands, as well as in all Arab Andalusia, in other words, Spain and Portugal. Whereas the Christian West has had no desire to coexist with Islam and the Arabs. Muslims who revere Moses and Jesus as God's prophets, whereas most Christians and Jews in the so-called tolerant West have no respect for Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and are rudely contemptuous of him alayhi salam and of Islam. The Western Crusades bloodbaths against the Arabs were triggered by the decisive defeat by the Byzantine army in 1071 at the hands of the Turkish Seljuk Abbasid army. Fearing that all of Asia Minor would be quickly overrun by the Abbasids, the defeated Byzantine Emperor Alexius I quickly appealed to his Christian rivals and opponents in Western Europe, that is, Pope Urban II and his other fellow Christian rulers, to come to the aid of Constantinople by undertaking a pilgrimage or a crusade to free Jerusalem and the rest of Palestine from Arab and Muslim rule. Pope Urban II promised that all crusaders would be exempted from taxes, their debts would be forgiven, their sins will be washed away, and a special place in paradise would be guaranteed. Subhanallah. The response to his call was really extraordinary. 160,000 heavily armed Europeans, an astounding figure for that time, formed the armies of the First Crusade. It seemed that the whole of Western Europe was marching east. It was the first time that Western Europe had come together for any cooperative act or cause since the fall of the Roman Empire. Nothing like it has ever happened in the history of the West. European unity was clear and purposeful. The objective was to kill the Arabs and the Turks, whom Pope Urban II described as, and I quote, an accursed race a race utterly alienated from God. And he urged his followers to exterminate this vile race from our lands. SubhanAllah. The Crusaders foraged the Turkish countryside. They plundered the villages and farms and set them on fire. They mercilessly massacred Muslim peasants and burned their young children alive. As pure racists, the cruel Crusaders directed their violence towards any dark-skinned people and those who simply wore different clothes from them, regardless of their religion. Pierre L'Hermet's peasant band even attacked non-Latin Christians and slaughtered them in heavy numbers, hung their babies on cooking spits, roasted them over open fires and ate their flesh. Astaghfirullah. The Crusaders killed, pillaged, and took many Muslim prisoners who were later sold into slavery. Pope Urban II's bloodthirsty warriors for Christ eventually reached their goal, the city of Jerusalem. The Crusaders laid siege to Jerusalem for 40 days in preparation for their assault on Jerusalem. The soldiers of God fasted for 3 days, confessed their sins, and they received their communion. The Crusader leader, Lord Tancred of Hauteville, promised them that if Jerusalem surrendered, all Arab and Muslim lives would be spared, and that the sanctity of all Muslim religious places, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque, would be maintained. The Arab governor of Jerusalem surrendered without a fight to Lord Tancred. But, and a big but, the Crusaders did not keep their word and butchered most of the Muslims and Arabs in Jerusalem. Tens of thousands of non-combatants, Arab and non-Arab, whether Muslim or Jew, or even native Christian, they were beheaded, they were shot with arrows, they were thrown from the towers, they were tortured or burned at the stake. When the killing finally stopped a week later, on Friday, July the 22nd, not a single Arab or Muslim could be seen alive within Jerusalem. Tens of thousands of Arabs and Muslims were lying dead in pools of blood in front of their own houses or their stores, and outside all of the holy cities' mosques, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was shamefully desecrated. The Dome of the Rock, next to Al-Aqsa, was converted to a church by the Crusaders. The fate of the Arabs, or the fate of the Jews, Arab and non-Arab alike, of Jerusalem was no less atrocious. During the first hours of the carnage in Jerusalem, the entire small Jewish community of the holy city gathered in their own main synagogue to pray. The Crusaders barricaded the exits and stacked all the bundles of wood they could find in a ring around the synagogue. And the temple was then burnt. Those Jews who managed to escape were massacred in neighboring alleyways. The rest were burnt alive. The monuments of saints and the tombs of Ibrahim alayhi salam were completely destroyed by the Crusaders. One eyewitness wrote that at the Temple of Solomon, where approximately 10,000 Jews were slaughtered, quote, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridal reins, unquote. In writing about the mutilated Jewish corpses that covered the temple area, the priest Raymond Aguilera joyfully quoted Psalm 118, and I quote, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." When Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu conquered Jerusalem, the patriarch Sophronius was the leader in the Christian church. Although numerous Muslim armies under the command of Khalid bin Walid and Amr ibn As began to surround the city, Sophronius refused to surrender the city unless Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu came to accept the surrender himself. And as you know, he was in Medina at the time. So he left Medina alone with one servant and a donkey. And they were taking turns to ride the donkey. It so happened it was the turn of the servant to ride the donkey as they were entering into Jerusalem. Although the servant insisted, Sayyidina Umar said, no, it's your haq, your right. And of course, when Sophronius saw the servant, he thought that was Sayyidina Umar. This was the humbleness of the great Khalifa, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, subhanallah. So he was greeted eventually by Sophronius, who was amazed that the Khalifa of the Muslims, one of the most powerful people in the world, was dressed simply, simple robes, and was indistinguishable from even the servant. Then, fast forwarding, then came the savior and the hero of Islam and the Muslim world, Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahimahullah, to restore the honor and dignity to the Muslims. Both Christians and Muslims admire Salahuddin. They used to call him Saladin in non-Muslim books and so forth, Christian, they call him Saladin. He was a celebrity of history, whose image occupied a full page of the Millennium issue of the Time magazine, the inside front cover, for his chivalry and his noble character. Salahuddin's character and virtues were purely a reflection of the teaching of his faith, Islam. Subhanallah. Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahimahullah, came and he defeated the Crusaders, known to the Muslims as the Franks, and he recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. King Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart, who led the Third Crusade in 1189 to recover the Holy City, but he failed. He met Salahuddin in a conflict that was to be celebrated in later chivalric romances. Although the Crusaders failed in their purpose, Richard the Lionheart gained Salahuddin Ayyubi's lifelong respect as a worthy opponent. Salahuddin, rahimahullah, his generosity and sense of honor in negotiating the peace treaty that ended the crusade won him the lasting admiration and gratitude of the Christian world. Salahuddin Ayyubi worked on three following principles in his rule, which are extracted. Aggression, number one, is to be met by equal resistance. 2, one should not exceed the limits in punishment. 3, to forgive and treat well the weak or defeated enemy is better than revenge. Subhanallah. Salahuddin used to say, it is better for one to err in forgiveness than be right in punishment. Subhanallah. History tells us when the Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi regained Jerusalem from the invading and the ruthless Crusaders, who had 90 years earlier massacred and savagely treated its Muslims and Jewish inhabitants, he met a group of Latin Christian women who addressed him. They said, "Oh Sultan, you see that we are living. Amongst us are mothers, wives and daughters or sisters to the soldiers in captivity with you. These men are our support in life, and if we lose them, we will lose everything. But if we leave them for our sake, you will be giving us back our lives." Subhanallah. At this, our Salahuddin Ayyubi smiled, and he gave orders that the sons and husbands of those women to be set free. He even went further and gave money to the women whose supporters were killed in the battle. An irate, angry French girl came up to the Sultan and said, "You murderer, you have killed my father and captured both of my brothers, so there remains no one to support me." Salahuddin Ayyubi calmly ordered that her brother be set free and then addressed her. "As for your father, he was killed in a war which he started himself and in which many innocent people were killed." The French girl looked down full of shame and regret for her insolence with was such an honorable man, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "Forgive me, sir." It was a bitterness of grief and the description given to us of your people and the cruelty in our country that caused my insolence. But now I see that you are honorable enemies, and I have not despaired of your forgiveness. May God curse the liars in our homeland who deceived us and depicted you as savage assassins who had desecrated our holy places. They exploited our emotions and sent us here. But when we came to know you, we could not see the truth in any of their claims. Subhanallah. Yeah, enemy, so-called enemies saying once an advisor of his suggested, why do you not save the money you give in the charity to the poor and religious teachers and spend it in your war efforts? They told Salahuddin, the fellow Muslims, and Salahuddin Ayyubi says he could not do that because the prayers of those poor people were the source of his strength in the wars. SubhanAllah. As I said at the start, that of all religious wars in human history, waged by any religion, at any place, at any time, none have been bloodier, more genocidal, more barbaric, and more protracted than the 200-year holy wars by the Western Crusades against the Arabs and Islam. When the US President Bush, he claims God speaks to him, Allah. And there were 50 recorded statements where God speaks to him. And I'm quoting this. I am driven with a mission from God to bring it more contemporary now. Yeah. God would tell me, George, go and fight these terrorists in Afghanistan. And I did. And then God would tell me, George, go and end the tyranny in Iraq. And I did. And now again I feel God's words coming to me. Go get the Palestinians their state, and get the Israelis their security, and get peace in the Middle East. And by God, I'm going to do it. This is quoted in Sharm al-Sheikh in August 2003 in the book. You know, a female CNN journalist heard about an old Israeli man who had been going to the Western Wall to pray twice a day, every day for a long, long time. So she went to check it out. She went to the Western Wall, as you know, it's the Holy Wall. He was walking slowly up to the holy site, and she watched him pray, and after about 45 minutes, when he turned to leave, using a cane and moving very slowly, she approached him for an interview. Pardon me, sir. I am so-and-so from CNN. What's your name? He said, my name is so-and-so. He replied, sir, how long have you been coming to the Western Wall and praying? See, for about 60 years. 60 years. He said, that's amazing. What do you pray for? He said, I pray for peace between the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims. And I pray for all the wars and all the hatred to stop. And I pray for all our children to grow up safely as responsible adults and to love their fellow man. So the CNN lady journalist says, how do you feel after this, doing this for 60 years? He answers, it's like I'm talking to a brick wall. So the moral of the story is, I guess that the Israelis should stop talking to walls and start talking to people around them. Today, we look for a Salahuddin Ayyubi to bring honor and dignity to the Muslims of Palestine. We urge the Israelis to look deep into history and take note that throughout history, whenever you are under Muslim rule, you lived in peace and in harmony. So as you want and pray for peace, so do the Palestinians. And we stand worldwide for peace, but not at the expense of domination and relinquishing Al-Aqsa. one of the imams of the masjid in Palestine was asked, what is the best way to visit Palestine in the current climate? And he replied humorously, in a jet fighter. But with a slight reflection and with seriousness that the topic deserves, he says, don't come and visit us, come and liberate us. Subhanallah. Birruh biddan nafdika ya al-Aqsa. We shall overcome. Amen. But the impotence and the silence of the Arab states is disgraceful, disgusting towards Palestine. That they're not doing anything. Right? All they can do is just recite, like our oppressors, our pioneers that came to Cape Town and the colonialists oppressed them and murdered and killed them, like it's happening in Palestine. All they can do is recite Ba'ad a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ. This is now towards those that are impotent and not doing anything about it. What is wrong with you that you do not fight in the cause of Allah, and that you do not fight for those that are weak and those that are ill-treated and those oppressed among men, women and children? الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ, whose only cry is رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا. Oh Lord, rescue us from this town whose people are oppressors. وَجَعَلْ لَنَا مِنْ لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا وَجَعَلْ لَنَا مِنْ لَدُنْكَ سُلْطَانًا مِنْ لَدُنْكَ نَصِيرًا. And raise for us from you one who will protect us, and raise for us from you one who will help us and grant us victory. Ameen. 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 As Muslims, we should be unapologetic about our commitment to peace and justice for Palestine. What can we do? We can supplicate, we can educate, and we can advocate. When we supplicate, make a special dua for our brothers and sisters living constantly under fear and terror in Gaza and under occupation in other parts of Palestine. If they are not in your dua, they are not in your thoughts. When it comes to educate yourselves and others about the history of Al-Aqsa and Palestine, as well as the magnitude of human suffering under apartheid, occupation and blockade. Help your neighbors, co-workers and classmates understand the media bias and share the stories of Palestinians for many decades. Advocate, you challenge the TV channels, radio stations, newspapers, and social media influencers for the dehumanization of Palestinians and the erasure of Palestinian suffering. Demand fair coverage of Palestinian voices and stories. Call your representatives for their selective human rights and for not condemning the Israeli bombing and killing Palestinians. Cape Town has a long history of recitals, and in the Khatat we recite this. And this is a tune as well. الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. But what does it say? Those believers unto whom the people, the hypocrites, said, verily the people, the pagans, have gathered against you a great army, therefore fear them. But it only increased them in Iman. And they said, Allah alone is sufficient for us, and He is the best disposer of affairs of us. When will the world say enough? We ask the question. Ya Allah, Ya Hafiz, help and protect the people of Palestine. Ya Allah, Ya Latif, ease their pain and suffering in Gaza. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, bestow your mercy on them. Ya Allah, Ya Fattah, open the doors of sustenance and provide relief to the besieged. Ya Allah, Ya Shafi'i, Heal the wounded men, women and children of Gaza. Ya Allah, Ya Salam, bring peace in Gaza and in the persecution. Birruh, biddam, nafdika ya Al-Aqsa. Birruh, biddam, nafdika ya Al-Aqsa. With our soul, with our blood, we will cleanse you, O Aqsa. Oh Allah, make it come to fruition soon. Thank you for listening to my heart.